pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today / Five Rings, kind of a hybrid today. It's Thursday. That's how we roll on Thursdays. Joining us to start to talk about the Canadian men's national team and as well as some Olympics a little bit after, Gavin Day of the Canadian Press and freelancer, a lot of other places. Gavin, good morning.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey Gavin, it's good to talk to you. And we wanted to have Gavin on today because he's a good combined guest between both the Olympic stuff and the Canadian women's national team. I said men there by instinct because the John Herdman stuff is confusing me. So let's just start there, Gavin. What was your initial thought when you heard that John Herdman was moving to the Canadian men's national team?
I think just about anybody else involved. There's a lot of shock and quite a bit of stun there. There'd been, like everybody else, sort of rumblings that there's something beneath the surface. But when it was Herdman taking over, I first checked the date. I thought it was April 1st at first, to be honest with you, just because, so many moving parts happening at once. I just didn't see this all, happening at one time. And there it was. He slotted into place. And, there was a camp that started yesterday. And so I just sort of thought, this can't all be happening on the same day at the same time. But there we are.
Fair enough. So let's go this way. Do you think he can succeed? Do you think he can make this work?
The program has had so many stops and starts that I don't know. I know how tremendous a coach he is, a motivator, how thorough he is, leaving no stone unturned, but it's a completely different game where you get a team for couple weeks a year, a couple camps a year, compared to the women where you can have your residencies and you with them day in and day out. I think his impact will be with youth teams more than anything, where if he is given some rope to work with, some time, and see a vision unfold with youth players, that's where his real impact will be.
Now, when we're looking at this on the women's side for a second, we had clarification from Christine St. Clair yesterday saying she was aware, she did talk to John, but she was still shocked and speechless when it happened. What do you think is the next step? Is it continuity? Is it with Robin as the helm now for former assistant to John Herdman? Is it just the status quo and continuing the vision that John Herdman started? Or how do you feel if you were a player? How do you view this from the Canadian women's national team side?
I think there's enough continuity that so much maintains with the women's program. You're not going to replace John's charisma or the trust he engenders in that team, but there's still enough of the same staff that there's enough continuity as possible. I always thought, Bev Priestman was going to be one to step in and take that role. But when they say, they had sort of a line of succession in place, I fully believe that. But you do have to wonder that my big question is, does John bring over some of what he had with the women's program? The sports scientists or a goalkeeper coach like Simon Eady, or who stays in place. But as things stand right now, they've made sort of no announcements. There is enough of the structure that I think day to day the women's team is essentially the same operation.
So, being the same on the women's side, now John Herdman's challenge on the men's side will be to recreate an environment, a structure, and basically a safety net of trust. If you're John Herdman, how do you start on day one after this emotional and transitional week we just experienced?
Well, I think it sort of starts before day one, where players and staff, from what I gathered, I think they were about as shocked as all of us were. And I think the first things first is I think the CSA owes an explanation to the players who woke up a couple mornings ago, the guys in Europe, your Scott Arfields, your Junior Hoylets, your Adam Strafe, and sort of go, guys, this is what happened. This is where we're going, and this is why. And so that they can sort of smooth things out, whether that's John can do it himself, but the next thing is to sort of lay out a vision. And, there's an international window in March where there's sort of a first opportunity to make an initial impression. And I do like to think that enough of these guys keep an open mind. They've seen the success with the women, and they will listen to what Herdman has to say on day one. And whether they take it and run with it is sort of up to them. But, I think John sort of just has to be upfront with them day one, which he is, which he will be. He's the kind of guy who isn't afraid to just sort of leave it out there. So whenever that first camp is, I have no idea who's in with that camp right now with the under-23s, but the first team meeting is going to be a very important thing, and leave it open to questions, which John always is open to. And it is just going to be interesting to see just what first steps are taken whenever that first John Herdman men's national team camp is.
Gavin, do you think his style will work with the men?
It's so difficult to say, just because the structure that I've seen is based on the fact of spending so much time together and having meticulous preparations. John will be a motivator. He will be an ear for players. He's going to get to know the guys very well, I think. Whether it can work, it's so difficult to say. So many people can just sort of say, "Oh, it won't work. It's going to be," and then there is some success. But with Canadian men's soccer, there's sort of a moving standard of what works, because from what I've heard, there were a few games from Octavio Zambrano, and he was a rousing success. But the crux of that is Canada scored 4 goals against French Guiana, and people put a little too much weight into that. So, I think what sort of the everlasting standard is make the hex, and that's a success, or come close to it. Whether that can happen, I just don't know, because those games in Central America, John hasn't experienced those either as a coach, because with the women's teams, you don't get those threatening atmospheres in Central America.
Well, fair enough. I mean, well, this is my biggest issue with this, is that they've essentially hired a guy that has literally no experience in the men's game. So let me ask you this: is the fact that he has never coached in the men's game relevant, or am I being a misogynist when I say that?
It is such a touchy subject. You know what? For a national team program, it's almost you don't want to experiment. You want to have someone who's proven their chops, either coming through an international system, in the CONCACAF system, because I think CONCACAF experience is so important. But I can't really put together a thought on this, because you don't want to write someone off right away. But that is the important thing, is he has no experience either in a men's program or in CONCACAF in the men's program, which I think is so much more important. So, I'd like to keep an open mind. He's proven to have success in the women's game, but it's just a whole other beast. And I know, having covered CONCACAF for such a long time, so many good people have tried and failed at that. So I'm a wait and see kind of guy on this sort of thing, but there are just so many factors of coaching in this region in the men's game that you don't appreciate, or not appreciate, but experience in the women's game. But if I know John, he's going to dive in and if not sort of take in an international game, not involving Canada somewhere in Honduras or something. I know he's going to try to sort of get his feet wet a little bit and get up to speed, so to speak.
Moving on to the Olympic side for a second, and there's no any easy segue, Gavin. So I'll start with maybe the toughest one out there. The elephant in the room is a Russian elephant. How do you feel with the Russian ban that's been applied, but with the way with Russian athlete that can be proven clean to represent under the athletes from Russia banner? Does it do its purpose? Is the deterrent there? Is it? Are we going to have a different type of games because of this decision? I'm wondering your opinion, basically, on what transpired over the last few weeks with Russia.
Well, it's tough to say because you look at Russians who, they can if they prove they're clean, then they can compete. But there are going to be imagine there are going to be many women and men who, are still feeling some residual benefits of doping and say, look, I passed the drug test. You look at cyclists who used to be able to measure their glow times, as they call it, where they would know that after this amount of time, you're not going to test positive, but you're still going to have the effects of the doping that you're taking. So it's a cop-out to say, oh, just pass the drug.
Of the athletes, it's the federation, it's the Victor Mutko who's been banned for life by the IOC, but it's still taking charge of the World Cup this year. But that's another subject. But that's what I'm wondering. The entourage, the trainers, the coaches, shouldn't we, when I say we, I mean not like you and I, but maybe like society in general, realize that it's maybe just not the athletes, and then I don't want to say a percentage, but some athletes are victim as well in this quote unquote scheme. So shouldn't we pay attention as well on the coaches, the trainers, the sports associations?
Well, ultimately, they're the ones who implemented a lot of these projects. If you watch that Icarus documentary, you saw how pervasive the program was, where just about everybody had their finger involved in the project. So I think the story isn't quite over, and I'd still imagine there might be a few individuals who will be found out, whether it is athletes or coaches and all of that. But there sort of needs to be a full, I don't want to say with the full Russian program, like new people brought in, the old people go out in their entirety, a full change, a purge, I guess, if you say so. But it's just such a complicated situation that I don't think is over yet, and we'll see what happens here. But you'd like to think that everybody wants to keep their noses clean, considering the attention and the spotlight is so strongly on them right now.
Gavin, I'm going to ask you a very philosophical, very difficult question right now. Should we care? Are we at a point now that there's so much doping out there that we should just throw our hands up and go, whatever, do whatever you need to do?
Not really, because I don't want, there is, as much as it's become a corporate kind of festival, despite the high-mindedness of the goodness of sport, there still is, I think, a little message in that, there are people watching. And I don't want to live in a world where we have to do this to succeed. And, there are kids still watching. And frankly, I don't want us to just sort of say, oh, yeah, you do whatever. I just don't want that message to get down to young children, especially you look at the COC and how much they sort of have that let's inspire kids message and going out in schools. And, if it ever comes to the point where we just sort of throw our hands up and say, screw it, that's just completely the wrong message. I think that battle has to go on, or let it die entirely. One or the other. And I don't think anybody's going to let the Olympic movement die entirely. So, I just think it has to continue. And if anything, stronger sanctions, there is the 2-year ban right away. But if someone's knowingly doping, knowingly doing something wrong, maybe you go with a lifetime ban right away. But, I don't think there should ever come a time where we should say, you know what, screw it, you guys do what you want to do.
I'm looking at a photo of Ben Johnson as I interview you right now, so maybe I'm the wrong person to ask this. But I love the Olympics, Gavin. You love the Olympics. A lot of us do. Let's be positive for a second. Let's look at Pyeongchang and be positive. So I'm going to ask you this: what are you most looking forward to in a month or so time to watching?
I think I'm most excited about seeing an Olympics where there's actually winter there. No offense to Vancouver or to Sochi, but the main cities, it was very warm and comfortable. But Pyeongchang is going to have snow, and it's going to be great. The speed skating venue in Richmond and in Sochi, you look outside and it's green and there are trees, and trees that are all green. But it'll be great scenics for the shots in Pyeongchang around any venue where where you hear how cold it is. I mean, other than that, it's just another 4 years of. I always like how these people are interesting, these athletes are interesting. They all have their stories, and they're not told enough. And maybe that's what makes things such a big deal every 4 years. But meeting interesting people who are having met a number of Olympians, good to talk to, interesting people, and who are doing something ultimately not for a lot of money, but because they really love doing what they're doing.
Gavin, you mentioned athletes. Is there a single athlete or a team or a sports in particular that really gets you your focus, that you already circled that date on your calendar? For me, example, I want to see maybe Alex Harvey finally able to replicate some great results that he did in Sochi, but good results that he had in the World Cup, to maybe replicate this in Pyeongchang. And I'm wondering, on your side, is there one athlete or one sport that really gets you going?
Not so much one. I like you mentioned Harvey. I want to see if Devin Kershaw can, if he does the 50K in cross-country skiing, if he can sort of overcome that. He missed a gold medal and a podium by seconds or a tiny amount of time in Vancouver. And this is sort of the cycle again where they alternate between classic and freestyle and skating. And this is sort of the same event as Vancouver. So it's sort of the apples to apples comparison there. He's obviously 8 years older, so we'll see there. But, Harvey is a great story. I've always been sort of in terms of winter sports, a big watcher of the long track speed skating, short track as well. But I covered speed skating in 2010. I've done a few trials now. And a guy like Ted-Jan Bloemen, the former Dutchman turned Canadian, who really, there's not a lot of talk about him, but he maybe because he skates the 5,000 and the 10,000 meters, which a lot of people, just sort of see guys skating around in circles. But it's such a fun event where you sort of keep checking the time splits, and there's nothing much more exciting than the rising anticipation in a race like that, where a guy gets closer and closer, faster and faster, or two guys who are very evenly matched in a great international speed skating race. Now, Bloemen set the fastest time in the world this year in the 10,000 meters a couple days ago at the trials in Calgary. So I'm excited to see what he can do, especially going up against a guy like Sven Kramer, his former compatriot and arguably the best skater in the world right now.
We were talking off air, Gavin, about new sports and how Canada's good at new sports and how it's sometimes difficult to keep up. I'll take another angle on that subject. Is there any sports left, in your opinion, that are out of the Olympic Games and should be included in the Winter Games that are not there presently? Is there any sports left out there that are not represented? Like, I don't know, bandy hockey, 11 versus 11 hockey, like on a soccer pitch that's frozen or something. Is there anything left that it's still outside of the Olympic movement?
Yeah, winter sport, I'm not sure, just because there's so, the infrastructure for for winter sports is tougher. And so, I mean, a lot of it you're trying to cram into small mountain resorts, or, well, in 4 years' time, Beijing, which will be a whole other beast altogether. But, Bandy's an interesting one. I mean, maybe it's because it's not a North American thing that we obviously don't pay any attention to it. But I've heard of it, and I guess seen pictures of it. It does look interesting. You'd think it'd be something where Canada could also compete a little bit if they sort of paid a little attention to it. I'm sort of a sucker for, not a sucker, but you look at basketball and it's indoors and played in winter. So maybe there should be something like basketball moved over from the winter games. It'll never happen, but in truth, something like that is a winter sport, and maybe belongs in a winter games. But other than that, I'm just trying to think of it. There are just so many little niche things that are done. Well, anybody remember ski ballet from the beginnings of the freestyle era when they came in? There was moguls, aerials, and ballet just kind of disappeared off the face of the planet. And it's a blast from the past. But honestly, I don't think they can add any more right now. They've added all these events that are over in about 20 seconds that I think, well, we'll see, but I can't imagine much more expansion right now.
Is there a way to have another sport where basically you're on skis or something and you go really, really high? Because that's essentially what the Olympics are becoming. Gavin, I want to ask you this question for my last question is, at the end of this day, in a month from now, who are we going to be talking about from Canada? Who are we going to be talking about in the world? But name me one athlete from both Canadian and the rest of the world that we're all going to finally know the name of.
I'm gonna finally know the name of. Knowing us, it's going to be some random hockey player who we thought, oh yeah, that guy kind of thing. Where Canada will, still manage to pull off some kind of medal or gold medal or what have you in hockey, because of course they're announcing the team, and it's non-NHL players. So that's my sort of theory for Canadian, is it'll end up still being a hockey name, whether it's someone scoring in overtime in a medal game or what. But that's my pick there. I would love it if we got an international name that Canadians weren't familiar with before. That sorry, I lost my train of thought. It'd be cool if we sort of knew a lot of these international names more over the 4 years, just because we are so Canadian centric in how we sort of pay attention things to here. But I go back to cross country skiing, where there's a name like Marit Bjorgen, the Norwegian women's skier, who's just been so timeless. They're winning medals consistently over the years. But then I sort of look at the men's side, and you look at guys like Dario Colonia, who's been around for a long time, the Swiss skier. And then lastly, a guy like Sergei Ustiagov, who would be a independent athlete competing for Russia or whatever they're calling it. But I think it'll be a cross-country skier who comes out and wins a number of medals, or there's always a biathlete as well. But I think it's always the big medal winners, your Bjorn Dahlies, your Thomas Alsgaards, who get at least that little bit of international attention. And I think that's where it'll come from again, as a cross-country skier.
Gavin, thank you very much for your time today. You can follow Gavin on Twitter at GavinLDay. We'll be right back after the break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Myself, Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins, as always. Duane, one thing I'm wondering, and is for you as well, is what are you looking forward for Pyeongchang?
That's a big question, and you know what? I'm looking forward to a safe games that end positively. I guess is the biggest thing. I'm really worried about this, Kevin. I'm really worried about these Olympics because of the political climate that we currently are living in. So I'm mostly looking forward to the idea that we have these games and that they're inspiring and that nothing happens and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, it's kind of sad that we have to go down that road, but I mean, I'm a little worried, and I'm a little worried about the Olympic movement in a lot of ways because of Russia, because of the political climate, because of everything that's going on. And I'm reading a book right now about the Olympic movement, the history of the Olympic movement, and every time I read it, I get sad, Kevin, because I believe so much in it, but there's so much crap going on around it that just makes me sad.
Yeah, and it's now after today we're going to change our focus and put it back more on the athletes and on the upcoming games in about 5 weeks' time, Duane. It's the Olympics in about 5 weeks. We'll have a nice 3-hour show where we see athletes just go into the stadium and see it should be a fun show. So that's 5 weeks away. But yeah, there is a lot of negativity surrounding big associations right now in the world itself, with transparency becoming a word and more a way to do things, and we're expecting transparency now, and it's not just a utopian thing. It's something we need and strive for, and we have the technology now to achieve it, and people have the technology to keep other people accountable, and I think this is where we are now. It's a difficult transition period, but hopefully where we're going is better than where we have been.
No, for sure. But I guess to answer your question in a little more scoreboard fashion, what am I most looking forward to? I'm looking forward to, this is going to be an odd answer. I watched the mixed curling last week. I'm kind of looking forward to watching mixed curling, having so much more curling in the Olympics, because I always enjoy the fact
That's not enough? You don't have enough?
Well, there's 3 events now, men's, women, and mixed, and I think that's great. And there's not. I'm trying to think out loud. There's not another event that's mixed out there in the entire Olympic movement. So that's going to be awesome to watch that. So yeah, I'm
that's
looking
fair.
forward to just basically learning someone's name that I don't know right now. Even though I follow this as closely as anyone, I'm still looking forward to the idea of meeting someone new.
No, yeah, that's a good point. And I have to say, I agree with Gavin on the hockey team, and it'll be interesting for me to have like a star has to be born in this tournament, right? If Canada's going to win, there's a name that's going to become a household name. They're like the Paul Henderson of 2018, right? That could be interesting, and maybe this player will become a household name and create a career out of the moment in the Olympics. You know, you never know. You can get a contract proposal or a trial in the NHL, and then who knows, becomes a star, becomes Wayne Gretzky. Who knows? It's all possible, and that could happen in Pyeongchang.
There is no doubt that there will be someone from the Canadian men's national hockey team that becomes a great third liner for the Calgary Flames. No doubt. Yeah, look, the men's hockey tournament is something that there's a lot of guys in the hockey world that are really looking forward to this, because there's a lot of underheralded, unknown guys that are going to, wear the maple leaf, and they're going to become household names for 2 weeks in about 3 weeks. So I don't know, though. Like, I'm still angry at the NHL for not going there, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to watch a single second of that tournament, because I have to do other stuff. Like, I have a job, I have things I need to do day in, day out. That might be my ability to function during those 2 weeks, is to skip the men's Olympic hockey tournament.
Well, yeah, maybe that's the answer, and we'll have to see. And you can follow Duane on Twitter, as always, at 24th Minute, and myself at Kev Laramee. We'll be back tomorrow with Soccer Today. We'll talk about the draft, the Super Draft. We're going to talk about that tomorrow with Travis Clark. And as always, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. Have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.